All right, your turn. As I tell my students, you always have to have a question. Go on, Rebecca. So, to the panelists, one of you will leap up and give a brilliant answer to this question. Just letting you know, you can fight it out amongst yourself about who that'll be.
I'm curious, the Gershwins were part of a very, very competitive milieu of songwriters in New York. You know, the Rodgers and Harts and Irving Berlin, and you know, there's a very, very long list of them. And I wondered how if they had much contact with those people, and if there were some that they were close to, and if there were some that they especially disliked or had struggles with. I'd be very curious about that.
I'll answer it. I had a humidor that was given to George when An American in Paris was premiered. And on it, you have Cole Porter's signature, Richard Rodgers' signature, Ferdinand Duke, going through the list, Irving Berlin. I mean, everybody who was anybody. They were all friendly with each other. They all had a lot of interchange with each other. And so, I mean, it was a small community of composers. I mean, there were so many shows being produced on Broadway in those days that, I mean, they were friends.
Shana Tova, my question is for you, Mark. What would you tell a modern arranger, interpreter, stylist of George and Ira's music? To paraphrase Tom Lehrer, when George Gershwin was my age, he'd been dead for 14 years. But some of Ira's best years were still ahead of him, and this music is alive. What do you and perhaps some of the scholars and archivists have to say to those of us who are still plumbing the depths?
In terms of what? I'm sorry, you can explain the question a little more.
We are not reproducing the music, we're taking it forward. We're interpreting it, we're styling the great music in new ways, just as George and Ira were taking elements of blues and the new syncopation, and really in the cradle of jazz, forming a new music. There's a new music to be formed today. What would you advise us?
Well, by all means, I mean, this is always to be advanced. I mean, George and Ira's music, you know, if you take their pieces like, you know, Of Thee I Sing and Lend Me a Cake, I mean, they went back to Gilbert and Sullivan, and they advanced it to that kind of a political satire. I mean, it's there to I mean, you always want to move this along. I mean, you have, you know, these musicals that are now on Broadway in the West End, like Andrew Lloyd Webber or Les Mis. I mean, they've advanced it to this sort of quasi-operatic mood. I mean, there's always things to do, even Rent, which is a non-dialogue type of musical. I mean, you're always going to be moving this thing along, and you might get into, you know, maybe there'll be a musical with using 12 tones or something. I mean, who knows? I mean, it's always there, and it's there for the creator to do it with what they want.
You should mention Of Thee I Sing, it was a swan.
No, Of Thee I Sing wasn't. No, Lend Me a Cake was.
Lend Me a Cake was, yeah.
Why don't you tell Mark what you're doing with An American in Paris, and what you're doing now that they couldn't do then?
We have our next, hopefully, Broadway show is a stage version of An American in Paris. I mean, it was only the movie, and there are producers who actually, there is a workshop for it in December. I mean, there's been a read-through, and it will hopefully have its, let's call it, out-of-town tryout December, around Christmas, next Christmas in Paris, and then hopefully we'll come to New York. And I mean, it starts out, instead of where the movie starts out, which is sort of like in the 50s and doesn't make much sense, the opening scene as it's envisioned now is VE Day in Paris, and you see them ripping down like all these Nazi posters, and that's where it stopped, and that's where the characters are sort of, they're all GIs, and they've ended, and they're all going to stay in Paris. So, I mean, it won't have, it's not going to be the movie, it's going to be based on the movie. And it's not going to be like one hit after another. They're going to try to make it, unique, but basically with the same idea. And it'll be, I guess, a dance musical because it's me. The director is Christopher Wheeldon, who's better known for ballet. And we'll see. I mean, we've certainly had success with Crazy for You, and if you put the right ingredients together, it works.
And of course, Crazy for You we just did with the musical theater kids. It's just last spring. It was a fantastic production. I have actually a program that was handed me by one of the members of the audience here, Of the I Sing, directed by Brent Wagner. And what was this? 2000, yeah. So we have a long history here with our performances.
You said Ira did not read music. Is there a possibility that because of that, he felt free to take more liberty with what George had written, or misread it, and therefore that could explain some of the changes that you said that were made? Well, I forgot which of you. I think you were talking about, yes.
Yeah, I was the one who. Yeah. I was the one who talked about the changes, but I wasn't the one who said that Ira couldn't read music. I think that he may have had, either had the kind of, and I don't read music either in the sense that I can't open a Haydn string quartet and hear it. I read music in the sense that if you put me in a chorus, I can do a good job, and I'm a modestly decent score reader, probably better than Ira was, but I'm not sure that he couldn't plug things out on the piano. There's a difference between saying I can read music and you open up Ein Heldenleben and you can hear it, and I even suspect that Irving Berlin could read music a little, and classically said he couldn't. Of course, he could play the piano wonderfully in F sharp major, and his harmonic sense was infallible. As was Gershwin's. What the orchestration, which works very well, he simply took his wonderful piano writing and put instruments to it. That's why Quiet All sounds so great, because the voice reading is impeccable. You look at it, my. Yes, okay, it's your turn.
Yeah, Ira did say at more times than one. He talked about his habit of, for example, asking George when George had written out, as usually happened. George wrote out or invented a melody with harmony below it. But then he often prepared, at Ira's request, a lead sheet, which would have the notes of the melody down there. Now, Ira, as he talks about his method of writing the lyrics, said that he tends to walk around the house for a day or two, going over the tune again and again and again. And once he has George's melody in his mind, he finds that having the notes on the page are a good guide in case he forgets to do it. But he obviously too did a lot of singing. Ira loved to sing. He sang. He was not vocally what you would call a singer, but his singing of the melody was one of the ways that he would impress it on his ear, so that he could invent things. So it's kind of, at a certain stage in the process, let's say, he found it useful to have notation in front of him.